Berlin, late 1942. The Reichsmarshal's headquarters reeked of tobacco and polished leather, a den of confidence built on past victories. Hermann Göring stood at the head of the long table, his white uniform gleaming beneath chandeliers, medals jangling with every gesture. In his hand was a dossier of Allied aircraft reports, recently intercepted by Luftwaffe intelligence. He flipped pages with visible disdain until one of his adjutants mentioned a new American bomber, something called the Consolidated B-24 Liberator. Göring's laugh filled the chamber. "A flying boxcar," he scoffed, baton striking the oak floor. "Too heavy, too ugly, too clumsy. They will never reach us." His generals chuckled obligingly. They had reason to believe him. The Luftwaffe still dominated European skies. Jagdgeschwader fighter wings returned each evening with fresh victory tallies, their pilots aces with dozens of kills apiece. German flak batteries already ringed every major city, and Göring insisted these defenses were impenetrable. What he could not see, what his staff dared not suggest, was that Germany's entire system was already out of balance. The Luftwaffe built perhaps 1,300 serviceable bombers per year, each a masterpiece but slow to produce. Pilot training pipelines shortened from 2 years to 6 months as casualties mounted. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, America's economy was turning into a war machine. Henry Ford's Willow Run plant in Michigan had just begun rolling out B-24s on an assembly line a mile long. Within 2 years, the factory alone would deliver more bombers than the Luftwaffe had ever possessed. But on this night in Berlin, arrogance prevailed. Göring paced before the great map of Europe pinned to the wall. He tapped Paris, then Warsaw, then Berlin itself. "The American is a businessman, not a warrior," he declared. "He may sell airplanes, but he cannot fight with them." Officers scribbled notes, none daring to contradict. To them, the Reichsmarschall was unassailable, the very embodiment of German air power. The irony is almost unbearable now. Less than 18 months later, those same flying boxcars would be thundering above the Reich capital, their shadows blotting out Göring's windows. Industrial arithmetic, invisible to his aristocratic sensibilities, was already working against him. Every boast, every dismissal would soon echo with bitterness. That night, however, Göring struck the map with his baton, his voice ringing through the chamber. "They will never reach Berlin." The laughter that followed was nervous but obedient. Outside, the winter wind rattled the shutters, carrying the distant hum of war that was already shifting beyond Germany's control. History had begun to write its correction, not in speeches or medals, but in rivets and engines built half a world away. Benghazi, Libya, August 1st, 1943. Before dawn, a hot wind stirred the canvas tents of the Allied airfield, carrying sand and the sharp tang of oil across rows of aluminum-skinned B-24 Liberators. Mechanics moved with disciplined precision, tightening bolts, testing engines, loading bombs. The low hum of the Pratt & Whitney R-1830S began to rise, a mechanical heartbeat echoing across the desert. Men adjusted harnesses, checked oxygen masks, and climbed into cramped fuselages that would carry them over mountains, rivers, and enemy fire to strike Ploiešt's oil fields. Lieutenant Jack "Red" Lawson of the 98th Bomb Group slid into the cockpit of his Liberator, serial number 42-40364. Sweat soaked his brow despite the cool of early morning. Around him, the crew performed final checks. The bombardier tested the Norden sight. The navigator double-checked coordinates. Gunners loaded belts of .50 caliber rounds. The B-24, unlike the revered B-17, was a high-winged, boxy bomber, nicknamed the Flying Boxcar for its stubby fuselage and ungainly appearance. Yet its range, up to 2,100 miles, and bomb load, 8,000 pounds, made it indispensable for deep strikes. The runway rumbled as engines roared in harmony. Lawson gripped the control yoke as the Liberator strained against gravity, lifting it over 65,000 pounds fully loaded. Around him, fellow bombers staggered into formation, each pilot relying on careful timing and strict discipline to maintain alignment across the desert expanse. For these men, the desert's glare and sand-driven winds were as formidable as the enemy. Hours later, the formation neared Romania. Liberators skimmed 50 feet above farmland, engines shaking the air and earth below. Romanian villagers paused, eyes wide, as the massive aircraft passed, each shadow stretching over sunflower fields like a harbinger of fire. Ahead lay the sprawling Ploiești refineries, the lifeblood of Germany's war machine. Smoke plumes from chimneys blended with the horizon, promising both danger and purpose. Flak erupted without warning. Black bursts tore into formations. Shells exploded in clouds of smoke and metal fragments. Fuel ignited in sheets of flame, filling the air with acrid stench that crept into oxygen masks. Liberators twisted and staggered but pressed on, their bomb bays disgorging 8,000 pounds of destruction onto storage tanks and refinery towers. Pilots reported a surreal mixture of adrenaline, fear, and awe, the sky a canvas of chaos and determination. By the mission's end, 53 liberators had been destroyed, over 300 airmen killed, more than 100 captured. And yet the U.S. factories, Willow Run among them, would replace every aircraft within weeks. For the survivors, the mission was both triumph and tragedy, a vivid proof that the Liberator could reach deep into enemy territory, striking at the core of German industry despite its critics' scorn. Lieutenant Lawson's battered plane limped toward the Mediterranean coast, black smoke trailing from a damaged engine. Behind him, other survivors joined in ragged formation, proof that what Göring had mocked as fragile and slow could endure and even prevail against the full weight of enemy fire. The war was shifting, and the Liberator was leading the charge. Ypsilanti, Michigan, 1943. Willow Run hummed like a living organism, vast and relentless. The air smelled of machine oil and hot metal, pierced by the hiss of welding torches and the staccato bark of pneumatic rivet guns. A mile-long conveyor of aluminum fuselages crawled past scaffolds, where men and women balanced on platforms to fit panels, mount landing gear, and wire turrets. Each worker moved with precision, rhythm dictated by the machines and by sheer necessity. Every second saved meant another bomber in the sky. Frank Delgado, a former aviation trainee rejected for combat after a training injury, riveted fuselage panels with careful urgency. Sweat dripped from his brow onto his denim overalls as the pneumatic gun hammered rivets into the aluminum skin. Around him, welders, electricians, and turret specialists performed their tasks in orchestrated coordination, transforming raw metal into fully armed B-24 Liberators. Every plane carried 10 men, 10 guns, and up to 8,000 pounds of bombs. But in Willow Run, the true power was in the thousands of workers orchestrating their creation. The scale of production was staggering. Where Germany had fewer than 1,300 four-engine bombers at its disposal, Willow Run alone would produce 8,685 B-24s by the end of the war. At its peak, the line rolled out a brand new bomber every hour. Factories across the United States could replace entire squadrons in days, a feat impossible for the Luftwaffe to match. American abundance was a weapon, invisible until released over enemy territory. For workers like Delgado, it was easy to forget the staggering numbers behind each rivet. Every aircraft represented a crew in harm's way and a target on enemy soil. Delgado followed the news from the front with anxious fascination. He read reports of Operation Tidal Wave, the daring low-level strike over Ploiești, and shivered at the casualty figures. 53 bombers destroyed, 300 airmen killed, more than 100 captured. And yet, in Willow Run, 50 new B-24s could be finished in less than a week. The arithmetic was almost obscene. The Americans could sustain losses Germany could only dream of replacing. Each plane he worked on was a response to enemy fire, a statement of endurance and inevitability. One evening, after a 12-hour shift, Delgado paused to watch a finished Liberator roll off the assembly line. Its polished aluminum reflected the late sun, engines silent for now, but ready to roar across oceans. He touched the fuselage, feeling the cold metal through his gloves, and whispered, "Fly true." Bring them home around him. Thousands of others repeated similar gestures, a quiet network of devotion invisible to the enemy but no less decisive than men in cockpits thousands of miles away. In that moment, Delgado understood that his labor, seemingly mundane and repetitive, was as lethal as any mission over Europe. The B-24 was not just a bomber, it was a bridge connecting factories and front lines, civilians and soldiers, democracy and destiny. Each rivet he drove was a nail in the coffin of the Reich. And in the silence after the factory whistle, he knew America's strength lay not just in pilots, but in the industrial army behind them. The morning sun had barely risen over the Romanian plains when the first wave of B-24 Liberators crested the horizon, engines roaring like thunder. Lieutenant Jack Red Lawson gripped the yoke of his serial 42-40364, eyes scanning the formation. At 65,000 pounds fully loaded, the flying boxcar responded sluggishly, but its long-range Davis wings kept them aloft across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. Smoke from distant refineries painted the horizon in ominous shades of gray and orange, a warning of what awaited. The mission, Operation Tidal Wave, was as daring as it was perilous. 178 Liberators, flying low to avoid radar, would strike the oil refineries at Ploiești, the heart of Germany's fuel supply. For Lawson and his 10-man crew, the flight was a delicate balance of precision, courage, and endurance. Flak positions lined the approaches, their 88mm shells capable of shredding aluminum and steel alike. The navigators plotted courses through valleys and farmland, guiding the formation down corridors barely 50 feet above the ground, weaving between power lines, trees, and enemy observation posts. The first bursts of flak erupted suddenly, black puffs blossoming around the formation. One shell ripped into the wing of Lawson's Liberator, sending a trail of smoke curling skyward. The bombardier yelled coordinates as the pilot adjusted the throttles, compensating for crippled engines. Around them, fellow bombers were hit, some rolling violently into the wheat fields below. The smell of burning oil wafted through the oxygen mask, acrid and unforgettable. Yet the formation pressed on, bombs released on schedule, igniting storage tanks and walls of fire and smoke that blurred the horizon. German gunners, confident in Göring's assurances, were blindsided by the scale. Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Eckhardt, stationed near the refineries, watched helplessly as wave after wave of American bombers crossed the sky. His flak batteries scored a few hits, but the numbers were overwhelming. 53 aircraft would be lost by the end of the day, over 300 airmen killed, 100 captured. And yet, for every bomber destroyed, dozens more awaited back in Michigan and Ohio, rolling off assembly lines at a rate Germany could not hope to match. Lawson's aircraft limped home, black smoke trailing from a damaged engine. Crew members wiped soot from their faces, hands shaking from adrenaline. The devastation below confirmed what U.S. intelligence had predicted. Ploiești was crippled. Fuel supplies were diminished, and Germany's ability to sustain mechanized operations faced a dire setback. Even from the air, the enormity of America's industrial capability was apparent. Each bomber lost was replaceable in days, each mission part of a relentless arithmetic the enemy could not hope to match. The Liberators were more than machines. They were symbols of a nation mobilized, a demonstration that democracy, production, and sacrifice could converge to achieve the impossible. As Lawson guided his damaged bomber across the Mediterranean, the desert coastlines emerging below offered a stark contrast to the inferno left behind. Every mile closer to home was a reminder that bravery alone was insufficient. It was the combination of courage in the air and labor on the ground that made the B-24 a weapon unmatched in scale and impact. Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Eckhardt stood behind his flak battery on the outskirts of Ploiești, the morning sun glinting off the polished barrels of 88mm guns. His crew, trained for precision, scanned the skies for the first sign of approaching bombers. Confident in Göring's predictions, Eckart had assumed any American strike would be small and easily repelled. The Reichsmarschall had mocked the Liberator, calling it a flying boxcar, yet here, stretching from horizon to horizon, came hundreds of them, engines droning like a mechanical storm. The first bursts of flak erupted prematurely. Black puffs expanded against the brightening sky, but the formations were vast and disciplined. Liberators skimming at low altitude made aiming difficult. The Davis wings allowed for stable flight even under fire. Eckart barked orders, adjusting angles of fire, but the sheer numbers were staggering. For every aircraft shot down, 10 more replaced it in seconds, each trailing smoke or undamaged, pressing forward relentlessly. He scribbled reports to command, the figures already alarming. 53 bombers destroyed, hundreds of American airmen dead or captured. Yet these losses were insignificant compared to the industrial force behind them. Eckart's crew experienced confusion and disbelief. American bombers flew low and fast, dropping ordnance with deadly precision on storage tanks, pipelines, and refineries. Explosions rippled across the Ploiești complex, sending plumes of black smoke into the sky. Oil ignited, coating the ground in sticky fire that smelled of chemical inevitability. Civilian observers fled while soldiers scrambled. Yet the liberators continued their methodical descent and returned to formation. For Eckart, the realization came slowly, like the steady dawn over the Romanian plains. The Americans were limitless in a way the Luftwaffe could not comprehend. German pilot training was shortening due to attrition. Aircraft production lagged, fuel supplies were scarce, and each lost bomber represented months of effort. In contrast, U.S. factories could replace dozens in a week. Willow Run, Ford's mile-long plant, had just begun producing B-24s at a rate of 1 per hour. The arithmetic was brutal. America could sustain losses Germany could not match. By mid-morning, Eckart noted a pattern in the chaos. Liberators hit their targets with near-perfect timing, evading most flak through coordinated formation, flying, and meticulous navigation. He could not escape the sense of inevitability. The United States had transformed industrial capacity into a weapon, one that reduced elite German training, precision, and experience to temporary obstacles. As the last wave of damaged aircraft retreated toward the Mediterranean, Eckart lowered his binoculars, hands trembling. He scribbled in his diary, "They will always return. Our guns cannot stop them. This war, it is not ours to win." The horizon still smoked from burning oil, a living testament to American abundance and the relentless calculus of democracy at war. For the first time, the officer who had once mocked the Americans' supposed limitations understood the true scale of the threat. Göring's assurances were hollow. The flying boxcars he had ridiculed were now symbols of an industrial force that Germany could not hope to match. And each surviving bomber a harbinger of attrition Germany would eventually lose. Willow Run, Michigan, 1943. The factory stretched a mile from end to end, a cathedral of industry where the roar of rivet guns and the hiss of welding torches formed a relentless rhythm. Frank Delgado wiped sweat from his brow, hands blackened with grease, and watched as a newly completed B-24 Liberator rolled off the assembly line. Its aluminum skin gleamed under the overhead lights, a silent promise to airmen thousands of miles away. For Delgado, each plane represented more than machinery. It was the embodiment of American democracy translated into industrial power. Across the Atlantic, news of Operation Tidal Wave filtered through newspapers and radio broadcasts. 53 liberators had been destroyed, over 300 airmen killed, 100 captured. In Berlin, Göring's assurances of invincibility had been shattered. But in Michigan, the math told a different story. At Willow Run alone, 8,685 B-24s would be completed by war's end, and at peak production, One bomber rolled off the line every hour. 50 aircraft lost in Europe could be replaced in less than a week, a scale Germany could not imagine, let alone match. The arithmetic was impossible, one factory producing more than Germany's entire four-engine bomber fleet. Delgado followed the line, inspecting rivets, panels, and turret fittings. Every detail mattered. A loose panel or misaligned gun could mean disaster for a crew thousands of miles away. Yet the production pace never slowed. Teams of welders, electricians, and mechanics moved with synchronized precision, their collective labor a force multiplier as lethal as any weapon in the sky. For civilians like Delgado, the war was fought in sweat and steel, every rivet, every torque applied to a wing rib, a direct contribution to the destruction of enemy infrastructure and the survival of American airmen. The impossible scale extended beyond Willow Run. Across the United States, aircraft factories, shipyards, and ordnance plants produced a staggering arsenal. In 1944 alone, the U.S. delivered nearly 96,000 aircraft. Every bomber lost over Europe was not an end, but a continuation of a relentless cycle. The enemy could destroy, America could replace, faster than Germany could rebuild. Abundance became strategy. Industrial output became attrition, and every air raid reinforced the inevitability of Allied victory. Delgado paused, placing a gloved hand on the fuselage of a completed Liberator. He could almost feel the collective effort of thousands of men and women in that touch, a tangible connection between assembly line and air crew. "Fly true," he whispered, knowing that the aircraft, carrying bombs, fuel, and 10 men, was already a statement of industrial supremacy. Every plane was a nail in the coffin of the Reich, each rivet a testament to a nation mobilized on an unprecedented scale. As the sun set over Willow Run, the mile-long factory glowed like a beacon. The hum of machines continued, relentless and unwavering, and Frank Delgado understood the truth. Victory was not only in the air, it was here, in the relentless orchestration of manpower and machinery, where abundance overcame scarcity and democracy triumphed through sheer industrial might. The Atlantic was gray and restless, the waves rolling like slow, endless drums beneath the hulls of Allied convoys. Overhead, the distant roar of 4 Pratt & Whitney R-1830 engines grew into a relentless crescendo. B-24 Liberators from the 479th Bomb Group traced the coastline, scanning the horizon for the hunters that had long turned the ocean into a graveyard for Allied shipping. U-boats, once untouchable, now faced a predator that could fly beyond their torpedoes and into the heart of their patrol zones. Lieutenant Lawson, now seasoned from the tidal wave raid, adjusted the throttles as his crew peered through the plexiglass nose. Depth charges were strapped beneath the wings, bombs designed for stealthy, calculated delivery. Every bomber carried 10 men and 10 guns. Yet it was the combination of endurance and sheer numbers that turned the Atlantic into a lethal trap for the Kriegsmarine. Submariners reported the sound of engines long before the visual of wings cutting across the horizon, and many would never see the sky again. For German U-boat crews, the new threat was staggering. Eckhart, now reassigned to coastal defense, monitored sonar reports with increasing alarm. Patrols that once dictated terms along convoy lanes now scrambled to avoid being spotted from above. The range of the B-24, up to 2,100 miles, allowed it to escort convoys across vast stretches previously left vulnerable. One Liberator, flying from Newfoundland to Gibraltar, could cover in a single sortie what a U-boat had once hunted over days or weeks. The arithmetic was crushing. Each squadron could patrol hundreds of miles simultaneously, sink dozens of submarines, and return with minimal losses compared to the enemy. Lawson's formation swooped low over a reported U-boat. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from the conning tower, but the Liberators released their payload with surgical precision. Explosions tore through steel hulls, sending black smoke spiraling skyward. Survivors in the water looked up at bombers like gods of destruction, realizing too late that German scarcity could never overcome American abundance. For every submarine sunk, American factories produced dozens more aircraft, each carrying more fuel, bombs, and crew than the enemy had vessels or men to counter them. As the mission concluded, Lawson glanced down at the convoy, now safe from surface and underwater threats. The Atlantic Gap, once a death sentence for convoys, had closed. The liberators had not only delivered bombs, they had rewritten naval strategy, proving that industrial capacity, endurance, and tactical innovation could negate the advantages of experience, stealth, and elite training. Back on the ground in Michigan, Frank Delgado read the news with quiet satisfaction. Another dozen bombers had struck, another series of U-boats sunk. Each plane rolling off the line represented another patrol, another escort, another disruption of enemy plans. The war was no longer fought only in skies or seas. It was waged in factories, in rivet lines, in the unwavering pulse of an industrial democracy. And above the Atlantic, the B-24s roared onward, wings slicing through gray clouds, unstoppable as the arithmetic that powered them. Berlin, early 1944. Smoke hung low over the Tiergarten, the acrid scent of industry and wartime ruin mingling with morning fog. Göring's office, once a shrine to certainty, felt smaller that day. Reports from Luftflotte commanders painted a stark picture. The Americans were flying deeper, faster, and in numbers no German factory could match. On the horizon, the faint hum of 4 engines growing into a rolling crescendo announced the approach of B-24 Liberators and B-17 Flying Fortresses together, a formation unprecedented in size, bristling with .50 caliber guns and laden with explosives. Lieutenant Eckhart, reassigned to coordinate flak batteries defending Berlin, watched the sky through binoculars, noting the precision with which American bombers maintained formation. The Liberators' Davis wings allowed them to glide with stability even under anti-aircraft fire, their long range making retreat impossible for German interceptors once the Americans reached city limits. Flak erupted in synchronized bursts, yet the sheer scale of the raid made defense nearly symbolic. Bombs rained down, shattering factories, rail yards, and residential blocks, fire leaping from warehouses like a living thing. On the ground, civilians scrambled to shelters, the air thick with smoke and dust. Screams were muffled by explosions, metal groaning under the weight of destruction. Eckhart's crew fired continuously, but even as they scored hits, damaged aircraft were replaced faster than they could tally losses. Berlin's defenders, once confident in elite training and strategic positioning, realized that skill alone could not counter the relentless arithmetic of American production. A single U.S. bomber plant could outproduce entire Luftflotte output in a month. Today, planes lost over Berlin would be replaced within days. Meanwhile, over the city, Lieutenant Lawson's crew observed the aftermath. Bomb bays emptied with surgical accuracy, smoke and fire climbing to meet the clouds. The sky smelled of burning fuel and asphalt, acrid and sweet. Each Liberator carried the weight of industrial democracy on its wings, 10 men, 8,000 pounds of bombs, and the combined labor of thousands in American factories. The pilots and gunners understood the stakes, but it was the scale, the arithmetic of replacement, endurance, and abundance that would ultimately decide the battle. Back in Michigan, Frank Delgado and his colleagues read news dispatches with grim satisfaction. Factories continued to hum, producing aircraft faster than Germany could tally its losses. Every rivet driven, every engine installed, translated directly into pressure over enemy cities, forcing the Luftwaffe to stretch its limited resources ever thinner. American abundance met German scarcity with devastating effect. By late afternoon, Berlin's skyline was dotted with smoke and craters. Eckhart lowered his binoculars, noting the destruction with reluctant respect. For the first time, the full weight of U.S. industrial power, the combination of production, logistics, and aircrew courage, was undeniable. What Göring had dismissed as a flying boxcar was now the harbinger of strategic reality, an enemy whose scale and resilience could not be stopped by skill or tradition alone. The hum of distant engines faded into the evening, leaving the city scarred but alive, a testament to both American might and the inexorable arithmetic that would reshape the war. England, late 1944. The morning fog hung heavy over the North Sea, chilling the air and dampening the tarmac of RAF bases. At Foggia, Italy, and later in East Anglia, newly completed B-24s and B-17 taxied into position, engines growling in unison like a single mechanical beast. American planners had learned from each raid. Formation flying, low-level approaches, and coordinated bombing runs were refined with brutal precision. Every sortie combined intelligence, tactics, and industrial supply. 10,000 rivets in Michigan, translating to lives saved and objectives destroyed across Europe. Lieutenant Lawson, now commanding a larger squadron, briefed his men. Weather conditions were brutal, gusting winds over the English Channel and cloud cover across northern France, but the bombers' long range and structural resilience made the challenge survivable. Turret gunners adjusted sights, bombardiers recalibrated Norden systems, and navigators plotted routes to avoid concentrated flak. Each adjustment was a lesson learned from missions like Tidal Wave. Precision was vital, but redundancy, abundance, was their ultimate weapon. Across the Channel, German radar operators and Luftwaffe command scrambled to respond. Eckhart, coordinating flak batteries, noted the increasing sophistication of American tactics. Liberators now flew in staggered formations, interlocking defensive fire arcs that minimized vulnerability. Pilots adjusted altitude in seconds, creating overlapping patterns that neutralized German counterattacks. For every bomber shot down, dozens remained, replaced by new aircraft produced back in the United States. It was an arithmetic that the Luftwaffe could not hope to match. Back in Michigan, Frank Delgado and thousands of factory workers continued the relentless rhythm of production. At peak output, Willow Run alone was producing a B-24 every hour. Across the country, ordnance factories, engine plants, and assembly lines ensured that each damaged bomber could be replaced faster than Germany could calculate its losses. Each rivet, each weld, was not just labor, it was strategy. The liberators overhead were extensions of the assembly line, proof that democracy's industrial might was as lethal as any weapon dropped from the sky. By mid-afternoon, Lawson's squadron reached their target, a synthetic fuel plant in northern Germany. Anti-aircraft fire erupted immediately, but formations held. Bomb bays released thousands of pounds of explosives in synchronized waves. Smoke and flames engulfed the target, the roar of destruction drowned only by the droning engines overhead. Each bomber represented the combined effort of civilians and soldiers, an arithmetic weapon that overwhelmed enemy resources and morale. Eckhart scribbled in his notebook, noting a grim truth: skill, training, and experience were insufficient against the relentless surge of American production and tactical ingenuity. The Germans could fight valiantly, but every hour of industrial labor in Michigan and Ohio shifted the balance further. The liberators had become more than aircraft. They were symbols of an unstoppable system. As Lawson guided his battered but surviving bombers back across Europe, the pilots glimpsed the smoke rising from the horizon. Each column was both a target destroyed and a testament to the industrial army that had sent them. The arithmetic of abundance had won another day, reshaping the strategic landscape of the war and making clear that the Reich's days were numbered. Washington, D.C., late 1944. In a dimly lit operations room, charts covered the walls, columns of aircraft production, sorties, and bombing accuracy statistics meticulously tracked. Brigadier General Thomas H. Harding studied the figures, spectacles glinting in flickering light. The numbers told a truth no propaganda could alter. American industry was producing war machines faster than Germany could destroy them. Willow Run alone had produced 8,685 B-24 Liberators, more than the Luftwaffe's entire four-engine bomber fleet. Across the United States, factories delivered nearly 96,000 aircraft in 1944 alone, Each bomber replaced losses sustained in daring missions like Ploiești or raids over Berlin. The arithmetic was impossible. One day's output could exceed Germany's annual production. 1 hour could exceed an entire squadron's inventory overseas. Lieutenant Jack Red Lawson reviewed mission reports, noting the contrast between human loss and industrial replenishment. 53 aircraft lost at Ploiești was devastating for crews, but the factories behind them rendered these losses strategically negligible. Each aircraft embodied thousands of hours of labor, linking assembly lines to air crews to targets deep within enemy territory. In Berlin, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Eckardt faced a grim reality. German pilots were elite, flak positions strategically placed, yet American abundance neutralized skill. Replacement outpaced attrition. Every damaged bomber returned to its factory, rebuilt and redeployed. The arithmetic of democracy had become a weapon, one Göring had scorned. Even occupied civilians grasped the scale. Endless bomber formations, burning refineries, destroyed fuel lines. They were evidence of an industrial might beyond imagination. A nation mocked for its flying boxcars had converted rivets and aluminum into strategic inevitability. General Harding closed his notebook, reflecting on the human element behind the statistics. Every rivet, every sortie represented sacrifice. Behind the arithmetic was courage amplified by machinery, a lesson that would echo far beyond the war. Western Europe, early 1945. Over the Ruhr Valley, thousands of B-24s and B-17 moved in massive formations, engines droning in a unified rhythm. Smoke and fire from previous raids rose like a curtain, blotting out factories, rail yards, and fuel depots. Lieutenant Lawson's squadron weaved through flak bursts, maintaining formation with almost mathematical precision. Each sortie was no longer isolated heroism, but part of a coordinated system of destruction and replenishment. German defenses were crumbling. Eckardt, now a senior flak coordinator, observed the relentless pressure from the skies. Bombers replaced losses faster than Germany could manufacture anti-aircraft shells. U-boats, tank reserves, and fighter planes fell behind in a war of attrition they could not match. American tactical innovations, interlocking defensive fire arcs, staggered formations, long-range precision bombing, multiplied industrial power. Across the United States, factories churned, producing at rates that seemed impossible to contemporary observers. One factory line could produce in hours what Germany built in months. Entire squadrons were ready for deployment before the Luftwaffe could respond to the previous day's attacks. The arithmetic of abundance transformed strategy. Missions were planned with confidence that aircraft, bombs, and trained crews would always be available. Civilians on both sides began to understand the scale. In Allied newspapers, statistics demonstrated total war's reach. Bombers delivered thousands of tons of ordnance, replaced hundreds of lost aircraft, and neutralized entire production networks. For every sortie flown, the balance tipped further in favor of the Americans, proving that industrial democracy could systematically dismantle totalitarian military tradition. Even Lawson, focused on his instruments and gunners, felt the immensity. Every B-24, every flight, represented a fusion of human courage and collective effort. The war's outcome was being written not only by bullets and bombs, but by rivets, welds, and the relentless rhythm of factories that never paused. As the squadron turned homeward, smoke trailing from destroyed targets, the lesson was undeniable. Skill alone could not stop the arithmetic of production, and abundance, coordinated with precision, had become an unstoppable weapon. Detroit, Michigan, 1945. Willow Run stood silent for the first time in years, empty except for lingering oil scents and the faint hum of idle machines. Frank Delgado stepped across the floor, hands still streaked with grime, eyes tracing the lines where B-24s had rolled off in endless procession. Each bomber, every rivet, had been a thread in the fabric of victory. The war was over, but the scale of what had been achieved was almost unimaginable. Across Europe, cities bore scars from bombing, Yet the combination of courage and industrial capacity had shifted the balance irrevocably. Lieutenant Lawson, now back in the United States, watched footage of destroyed refineries, smoldering factories, and triumphant air crews. He reflected on missions like Ploiești and Berlin, the danger, the loss, the chaos, but also the inexorable logic of American production. For every plane lost, 10 more waited. For every mission risked, replacement aircraft and crews ensured continuity. German officers like Eckhart had documented their amazement. Göring's mocking of the B-24 as a flying boxcar became a bitter irony. The very machines ridiculed had symbolized the power of a democratic nation mobilized. 1 mile-long assembly line producing a bomber every hour, tens of thousands of aircraft delivered annually, a scale Germany could not hope to match. Each bomber carried 10 men, thousands of pounds of bombs, and the collective effort of thousands of factory workers who never fired a shot, yet determined the war's outcome. Historians would later call it the arithmetic of democracy. It was not only technological superiority, but the fusion of industry, strategy, and human courage that rendered German resistance futile. The war had been fought in skies, deserts, cities, and factories simultaneously. Every rivet, every sortie, every ounce of steel contributed to victory. As Delgado left the empty hangar, he paused and placed his hand on the cold aluminum skin of a B-24 fuselage, whispering, "We did our part." Behind him, the quiet echo of human determination, machinery, and sacrifice lingered, a testament to a generation that had leveraged abundance, skill, and courage to redefine what was possible. The flying boxcar had carried more than bombs. It had carried the legacy of a nation, proving that industrial democracy could triumph over tyranny and that human ingenuity, when combined with collective effort, could change history itself.